Max Olson, ESPN.com, the real portal king. Max, between coaching changes, the portal, the CFP, when was the last time you weren't looking at a screen?
Oh, I heard there was signing day on Wednesday. Is that true?
Yes.
Did I miss that?
Yeah.
It's a lot, man. It's a lot right now. I have not. Can I say like I've had 8 hours of sleep a night? No, that has not been the situation this week. And next week, this week was kind of like the warm up week for the portal. Next week is going to be pure chaos.
Yeah. Absolutely. When it's actually open, and there can be movement. Before we get to the portal, though, what are your thoughts on the standoff as Pete Thamel reported is going on between Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State?
Yeah, this is it's a little bit surprising. I think there was a board meeting set for this morning, and I think the expectation was that he was going to the board to get them to sign off on, he's got to go hire two new coordinators, right, after firing Casey Dunn and Brian Nardo. And so I think the expectation was going to the board to kind of get approval on that. And now I think it gets the sense this has turned into a very contentious situation where it seems that they are wanting to make some changes to his contract and some reductions and need him to make some concessions on that stuff to move forward. And, the threat of firing him with cause I guess is out there, which I think it's about $25 million that they would owe him if they fired him without cause, and that creates a very sticky situation, and I think one that it's honestly surprising. I mean, I'm stunned that Oklahoma State was as terrible as they were this year.
And look, I think that in the recent history of college football, trying to fire your coach for cause ends up being very expensive and costly in other ways. So I'd be surprised if they went that route, but it certainly has turned into a very contentious situation for the winningest head coach in program history, a guy who is coming off his first losing season in forever. I was stunned that they went 3-9. Really did not see that coming. They got to make some I think it'll be almost a brand new staff if he comes back next year, but I think now there's a real question as to whether they are going to run it back with him.
I mean, can you, after all this, can you?
That is a hard question. Like, I think if both sides are kind of preparing to battle on that, like how do you kind of settle that and everyone move forward and just pretend that didn't happen. So I think that's a tough thing. And he's the third longest tenured coach in college football. Usually these don't end great. I would have thought it would end better than this. And I'm sure Mike Gundy does not want to go out 3-9. I mean, that's not representative at all of his legacy and his tenure there. So you hope that they can kind of patch things up there. But yeah, that things are in a very questionable place at the moment.
Max, a couple of other jobs that are actually open in the Big 12. Just curious your thoughts. UCF loses Malzahn as he takes that FSU OC job, and then West Virginia departs with Neil Brown. And I've seen both programs. I think this is just kind of how it works during the carousel, as you long for what you had that was successful before. So there's like pockets of UCF fans that are like, Scott Frost deserves another chance, and there's this report that I don't know how much validity there is to it that West Virginia will at least talk to Rich Rodriguez, but do you have any kind of a feel or a thought on either one of those programs and what they might look at or might do moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like the UCF situation has kind of flown under the radar a little bit, maybe just because of the way that Gus Malzahn left for Florida State. I think that's a good job in the Big 12. I think, obviously with 16 teams, it's gonna, like, that's a program where like you got to be able to do well in the portal and retain your talent and eventually build towards something. And I think that's a good job. I think that will be attractive, and I can see them going in a bunch of different directions. I did see the talk of, hey, can we talk to Scott Frost and kind of revive the magic of that tenure. Obviously, it's been a while now since Scott Frost was a head coach or even coaching in college football. West Virginia, I mean, wouldn't be that surprised if they did talk to Rich Rodriguez or I think Barry Odom makes sense for that one too, but Barry Odom's probably going to be up for a few of these jobs. I think that's a tough job, and finding, I think Neil Brown handled everything well there. They just didn't win enough games. So, I could see people sort of feeling like, hey, we need someone that's really familiar with this environment, and Rich Rodriguez makes a lot of sense. But I'm interested to see where Ren Baker goes with that job, and can you find someone who can really get that thing raise the standard there beyond just being a bowl team.
Max, what do you think about Bill Belichick potentially to UNC?
A little more believe it when I see it. I mean, I think that I think he would be the first coach in the history of football to run from the NFL to college football to live in the NIL world. That would be pretty surprising. I think that it does kind of make you wonder, like, what's going on with that job. Who are the front runners there? Like, are they getting some no's from like the initial people they're talking to, or kind of is that a pretty wide open search at this point? No, I'd be surprised. I think Bill Belichick's probably gonna, if you wait a few more weeks, he'll probably be able to pick among a couple NFL jobs, I would imagine. That one surprised me, no doubt.
What did you think about the comments? I don't know if you saw them or not, from Jake Dickert about John Mateer, and they're just trying to hold on to him. And I know a lot of college coaches are kind of dealing with that right now. But I guess a better way to ask this would be, how high up the list of like best players are you expecting in the portal would John Mateer be as far as the most attractive players that you think people will be coming after once that opens up officially?
Yeah, we did a piece this week on ESPN.com breaking down like 25 quarterbacks to watch ahead of this portal cycle. And I led the entire piece with John Mateer, because I think when you talk to personnel people who need a quarterback, you talk about the staffs who've kind of, like, if your guy's graduating or you just don't have one, these guys have kind of spent the past month or so kind of watching tape of everybody and trying to kind of build their board of who do we want to get. And John Mateer's high on the board for a lot of people. He's just a very talented dual threat player, explosive in the run game, still has room to grow as a passer. But I think, everyone you talk to, just the leadership and the moxie, like, I talked to Eric Morse about him earlier this season. He compared him to Baker Mayfield just in terms of his personality and the way he connects to a team. So there's a ton of people that would love to pick up John Mateer if he hits the portal. And guys, I think this is just the way this works now. And it's kind of going around the country everywhere. Like you basically have to, renegotiate and re-sign your guys every year. That's just kind of how this is right now, especially as we head into revenue sharing. And so, I'm sure that's frustrating for Washington State fans to feel like, hey, people are trying to tamper with our really good quarterback after you just lost Cam Ward to Miami. But that's just kind of how it is now. When you've got a great one, then you're going to have to kind of fight to hold on to him.
Max, is there a shocking portal entry for you yet? We haven't gotten to that point, have we?
Ooh, good question. There's been, by my count, we're at about 400 scholarship players that have officially gone in the portal, and most of those are grad transfers. I wouldn't say there's been a lot of like quarterback position, for example, like really not any shockers there. You kind of knew Jackson Arnold and Miller Moss and Connor Wegman were all guys that, had gotten benched at times this season. You kind of knew that there's probably looking for a fresh start a little bit. I think on Monday, when you can have the underclassmen go in, I think there will be some shockers. There's some I've heard that I'm just sort of like, no way. I'm not trying to tease you guys. I'm just saying, like, this is, you kind of hear a lot of names get thrown around and you're like, would they really actually go in? Like, obviously, I think that this cycle is probably going to have more of that, just because of there's teams that have more money to spend now. And if you've got a need, you want to go get someone who's worth the money. And so I think once the underclassmen can officially go in on Monday morning, you're going to see some guys go in that it might not make sense, but those guys are going to go in and make a lot of money.
Well, looking forward to seeing all that just chaos brewing and starting to unfold on Monday. Should be a wild week. Max, we do have games, conference championship games this weekend, and I'm sure, as you've seen and maybe even been involved with yourself, lots of talk about the playoff and who deserves what and this and that. Just what have been your thoughts on seeing this playoff scenario unfold with the 12 teams? We knew there was some foreshadowing. There could be some issues like this with the 12-teamer, but do you still like it? Do you now maybe have a change of heart? Where do you view kind of the postseason and how it's shaping up right now?
Well, I like the format of 12. I think that's been, the thing that Bob Bowlesby and everybody kind of pitched when they came up with this idea was that you would have more fan bases engaged in November and more games that matter in November. And I think that definitely was the case. I think that's a positive. But inevitably, here we are with this situation of, 2-loss ACC versus 3-loss SEC, and the committee defers to the SEC, right? And so I think those issues, like the Miami thing, I know people somewhat anticipated it, but it did shock me. It's disappointing. I'm not saying that Alabama can't compete if you put them in the playoff, but to say that Miami, has been one of the best teams in the country all year, you lose one game and it's over. That was pretty stunning to me. And I think the fact that Ward Manuel kind of came out and said such definitive things on Tuesday that, the teams that aren't playing this weekend are locked in. I think he may regret saying that, because I think you've got to continue to evaluate the resumes. And even if you're not playing this weekend, the teams that you played against are. And so I'm super curious to see, does the ACC kind of end up with that nightmare scenario of could Miami and SMU both get knocked out if SMU loses? I think the ACC probably will be the topic of conversation on Sunday. I still think I know it's very frustrating, Brett Yormark. I still think the Big 12 can get the 4 seed, but certainly it's going to depend on how Boise plays and how the Big 12 game plays out. So curious to see how that goes. But yeah, the ACC, I think right now you're in a pretty uncomfortable position.
Max, why? One of the things they need to ask themselves is, why are teams that aren't playing this week not in peril as much as teams that are playing this week?
Yeah, it's a good point. And as we go through this too, the thinking for the last few years has been, well, in order to get your best team into the 4-team playoff, you want to have a 1 versus 2 in your conference title game. Guys, after going through this playoff, I kind of feel like we need to come back to the conversation around divisions. Don't you think? Like the leagues are so big now that it's not possible to play round robin, right? Like we can't achieve that. So, as we went through all these different tiebreaker scenarios, like I have to imagine these commissioners should have that conversation again in the off season of can we find a way? I know that it's geographically it's stupid. Like there's not a way to draw these up anymore that everyone's happy with. But I think that if you could bring that back, I think that at least would hopefully kind of separate things a little bit better in terms of our teams getting punished that get left out and stuff. But then again, you may just have some upsets like we saw, where the Big Ten West was always bad. So maybe that didn't really fix everything, but I certainly wonder that as this plays out.
Yeah, certainly. And look, they could adapt an NFL type scheduling model, but divisions would at least ensure that the schedules would be somewhat on. That's the thing is, you can take any playoff eligible team and make a case for them in or out based on the schedule, because outside of a few teams, it's not like a lot of people have murderer's row, anymore when you look at the.
No, for sure. And now that we've done all this conference realignment, it's probably not that surprising that we've ended up this year with, an SMU makes it this far, but didn't play the best teams in the conference, right? Iowa State didn't play all of the best teams in the conference, nor did Arizona State. So, it's just that's going to continue to happen because you're going to have uneven schedules and stuff, and how you account for that. I think that's, you got to revisit it. But for now, let's just agree that the SEC schedules are harder than everyone's, and that's just the tiebreaker.
Yeah, well, they seem to agree on that already. I think the only difference is, and the SEC doesn't want people to know this, is that they've come back to the pack a little bit more than maybe they expected in year one.
Well, whenever the good teams lose in the SEC, it's because the league's incredibly deep. So it's it's going to be. Especially when I think you've got I think Ohio State and Oregon obviously are two teams that, and Penn State, I'd be interested to see can the Big Ten teams sort of dominate this playoff. I don't think that's impossible given the weaknesses that the SEC teams have shown. Texas had their one bad one against Georgia, but it have been pretty clean all year. But the rest of them, you kind of feel like they could make a run or they could lose the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. Max Olson, ESPN.com. Max, Godspeed to you next week, sir.
Thanks, guys. Always good to talk to you.
There you go. Max Olson, ESPN.com.